The reason that we're here tonight is to help raise funds for my trip to Mexico for HSCT treatment. That stands for hematopoietic stem cell transplant. This is very similar to treatments that I've done in the past years, except this time, along with stem cell, it will involve chemotherapy. I've been following this, the progress of this protocol for about 4 years now, and it's just that this is the time I feel it's right to do it. As many of you know, in 2003, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I could spend a lot of time tonight telling you what that is and what that means, but the brief description is MS is a progressive autoimmune disease that attacks my brain and spinal cord and basically messes up the nerve transmissions between those things. It's a lot like an electrical cord with a chunk of plastic coating missing. It tends to misfire at will. There's no known cause, and at this time in the United States there is no known cure. The treatment that I'm pursuing is actually being done here in the United States for cancer, but it is not allowed for multiple sclerosis. There is not a guarantee of repair to damage that is already caused in my body. However, there is a near 100% guarantee to stop progression. And having lived with this disease for 13 years, not getting worse sounds pretty good to me. I could spend a lot of time also telling you about the symptoms that MS causes, but there are a lot of different things, and it's different for everybody that has it. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what I've experienced in dealing with this illness. I have gone blind in one eye on 2 separate occasions. I have a lot of difficulty walking lately. Balance is an issue. I have a lot of numbness and stinging, and I deal with a lot of pain on a daily basis. This is from the nerve damage that MS causes. Two of the biggest hurdles, I think, for me since my diagnosis was losing the physical ability that I used to have and being able to plan. All my life I've been a planner. I basically like to know where I'm going, how I'm going to get there, and what's going to happen along the way. And MS took that away from me, because with MS, the plan is there is no plan. And I wasn't really happy about that, because I pretty much thought that the plan I had for my life was pretty darn good, and it didn't include having an incurable disease that would consume the next 13 years of my life. There are a lot of days where I may wake up feeling okay. I don't ever say good, because that's rare, but okay. And an hour later it might be the worst day of my life. So you never know. I did walk in here tonight on my own, and I may not walk out that way. Sometimes my voice goes hoarse without warning, and sometimes I have difficulty swallowing. So MS brought a huge uncertainty to life that I did not like at all. In April of this year, I woke up totally deaf in my right ear, and I did everything the doctors told me to do, including steroid injections through the eardrum. And just in case that's on your bucket list, go ahead and just mark that off, because that is no fun. But after 3 weeks of that, the doctor told me I would probably never hear again in that ear, and I am still deaf in that ear as of right now. And for a while, I really let that get me down. You learn a lot of new things when you can't hear like you used to. I discovered very quickly that noise was actually physically painful. It would cause me to be nauseated, to be dizzy. When I went out in public, I couldn't distinguish voices from other noises. And probably the most interesting fact is it actually takes both of your ears communicating with your brain to know where sound is coming from. I can hear things, but I can't always tell where they are, and that's very frustrating, sometimes very scary. But before this happened with my hearing, Keith and Roger and I had been talking about maybe singing again. We've all been really busy with a lot of things in life, and we'd been talking about the possibility of maybe trying to get together, and then this happened, and I just really didn't see how that was going to be possible. Eventually I went to a hearing specialist, and I told him that I wanted to sing, and the first thing he said was, "You can do that." And so I'm thinking, yay, this guy knows something the other guy didn't. And he looks at me and he says, "You'll just have to learn to hear with your brain." And I mean, I have to pretty much admit, I had no idea what that meant. And he said, "But the next thing that's going to be difficult for you is you'll have to buffer the sound in your good ear, basically with an earplug." And I pretty much thought, this guy is nuts. I just didn't see how that could work. But he told me, he said, "If you really want to sing, you'll figure it out." And I have to say, I left his office that day probably more down than I have ever been in the course of this disease. MS is a taker. It does not give back anything but bad, and I felt that I had lost enough to this disease, and this was just the last straw. And for me, I tried singing in the car on the way home with one finger in my good ear, and I don't know if you've ever tried that, but if you stick your fingers in your ear and talk, you hear yourself. And I thought, this is just impossible. It's not gonna work. And so God was very gracious to allow me to wallow in self-pity for a little bit, until one day it finally dawned on me that I could stay home and lock myself away from the world and do nothing and be miserable at not being able to have perfect hearing and not being able to do the physical things that I wanted to do. Or I could trust that God had a plan for me and that He could use me just like I am and just like I was. And if I would just trust and allow Him to do that. The next song that we'd like to sing tonight has always been, since the first time I heard it, a song that I consider to be my testimony song. As believers, we're all clay in the hands of the potter. And for me, that was never really a question. I understood the concept of that. The problematic part of that for me was trusting the potter, trusting God to do something more with my life than I could ever do for myself. People ask me if I'm afraid to do this treatment, and in a word, the answer is yes, I am. However, I'm more afraid of the future with an incurable disease that I know is going to progress, but I'm also conscious of not walking through a door that I believe God has opened for me. So for me, it's more about faith and trust and obedience. I also want to say that wherever you are tonight, we all go through trials and storms in life. That's a promise in God's Word. But whether you may be recovering from a shattered leg, like Keith, or recovering from a heart attack, like Roger, or whether you may have an illness that the doctor said there's nothing else we can do for you, whether it's heartache, sorrow, or loss, whatever it is, the question that I ask myself, and maybe you could ask yourself, is, do you trust the potter with your life? Will you allow Him to put you through that test of fire, and allow Him to make out of your life what He knows you can be, what He sees that we can't see right now? Is it worth the pain and the struggle? The answer to that question for me is yes. I pray that it would be yes for you as well.